Welcome everyone to East House. You'll notice there are a lot of programs on campus revolving around the election, and this is one of them that focuses on education. And we are really fortunate to have both Rick and Mike here to speak to you, answer some questions. Basically, the format for tonight is I have a set of questions with the basic ideas to try to tease out what are the implications of the educational policies of an Obama administration continuing or a Romney administration replacing the Obama administration. What are the different positions that each administration holds or purports to hold, and what are the implications for education going forward? So I have questions revolving around that, but we don't have to stick totally to that script. We want to be interactive as possible. So as we have our dialogue, feel free to raise your hand, interject, raise some questions, add your own knowledge and viewpoints as we go along, all right? Great. Okay, so one thing you might have noticed with in this election season is there isn't that much discussion in the media about education policy. Sometimes education is fairly dominant. It's the #1 issue. Often we've had candidates called the education candidate or the education president, and we're not seeing that this time. So again, we want to bring these questions out to generate some of this dialogue. And we're going to start off with federal policy. So most of you might be familiar with the Bush administration. The flag that Bush administration raised for federal policy was No Child Left Behind, which had to do with high stakes assessments, annual progress, control of schools for failing schools, and tying federal funding to those things. That continues on. President Obama came in and he brought with him Arne Duncan and the Race to the Top policy, which is more of a competitive grant system to try to initiate innovation in schools and the way that they're run and those kinds of things. Romney, there's still a question mark about what he might bring, and we're going to raise this question here. So to start off, let's start off by asking both of you, with the Obama policy in place now, and Race to the Top will continue even as he steps out of office, what impact has Race to the Top had on education policy and reform, and what do you see going into the future as it continues?
Well,
right?
Since it's a Democratic policy, maybe I'll start on that.
You're taking the Romney position, I'm taking the Obama. Is that correct?
No.
Just so I know which side
one
you're
we're
on.
doing, yeah. I probably will make some remarks as a California state official, because we have our problems with the Obama administration in some ways, and so I think that might be interesting since we're one of the most democratic states and it's a Democratic presidency. The Race to the Top was a change conceptually in federal education policy in terms of running a large-scale competitive federal grant, meaning you had, as a state, and now has extended it to local school districts, you had to volunteer to apply. It was not something that every state's participated in. And it was a competition where only some would win. There wasn't nearly enough money to fund all the states. And so most of the aid in prior terms, and still is what's called formula driven. If you have handicapped children, you get some federal money. If you have low income children, you get some federal money. If you have a career technical program, you get some federal money. It's a formula driven grant. It's called formula, and it's just it depends on the nature of the children you have in the state. The competitive grant Race to the Top then was where the Obama administration specified in tremendous detail what you had to do to win one of these grants. I was a Race to the Top reviewer of state applications, and it came, and so I got literally trained in it. So I'll just give you my background, what it was. But it was states had to meet several criteria. They had to have a program for a curriculum that was higher and more ambitious than the national average, or most of them had in the past. And the Obama administration supported the Common Core curriculum, which 46 states have adopted, which has the theme of curriculum that's fewer standards, higher standards, better standards, and standards that are articulated from K-12 to college. So you had to indicate that you were going to do something in the curricular area. And only 4 states did not get into that game: Texas, Alaska, Virginia, and one of the Dakotas, I think North Dakota. Secondly, you had to have a plan for teacher preparation and evaluation, and he was quite insistent on teacher evaluation, and gave extra points. You had to review these applications, and you'd get extra points for these things. So if you used tests for teacher evaluation, you got a big slug of bonus points with that. And then you had to have a data system that would provide data about student performance and provide a way for teachers to deliberate on continuous improvement based on various feedback on how students were doing. So California had trouble with meeting some of the data elements. He had 12 elements, I think, of data. And then you had to have a choice program, which they defined heavily as charter schools. And you couldn't you got extra points for not having a cap on charter schools, meaning the state couldn't restrict the number, and you have to have certain policies that encourage charter schools. So the Obama administration split with the teacher unions, which have and do support the Democratic Party, in 2 major places: teacher evaluation using test scores, and charter schools, which public school teachers and traditional schools have not been enthusiastic about because they're non-union, and they also have much more freedom in their contracts than they have no requirement to have unions in most states. So that was the race to the top. It was beautifully timed in that it came out just when the recession was hitting, and for a puny $5 billion, the state of California spends $60 billion alone. He got all this leverage. Everybody, got into this, and everybody about I guess 35 states, 39 states applied, and California, did backflips to try and get it, but it never did. Applied 3 times and was declined. So we did not meet the teacher evaluation standards, and we didn't meet the data standards that they had. It was enormously detailed. That has led to Romney's charge that there's too much detailed federal control. And it sure was detailed. So he had a lot of leverage, and it was an incredible game. It's like buying a house for $10,000 down, and it's a $500,000 house, and somehow you get enough leverage to borrow that. And he got a big impact. These policies spread, and so that's my view.
Is there any data yet on the effectiveness and the
No, they're still implementing the programs. They promised the moon. One thing in California we wouldn't do is promise the moon if we couldn't deliver it. And they are, cracking down on the states like Hawaii, which have not met the teacher evaluation requirements. Hawaii has a statewide union and the only statewide system. I don't know that it'll continue. I mean, if Obama's reelected, he probably will continue to get some money for this. But I think the money will run out, and there's no certainty that either the Republicans control Congress that he could get it, or that he would be able to do it even much more with a Democratic Congress.
Rick, what about Governor Romney? Does he have a detailed plan? Is he going to continue to support No Child
So I am
Left
going to take
Behind?
the Romney side.
Why not?
Okay. I think Race to the Top showed that with small amounts of money, you could get states to change their behavior in some ways. I happen to very much like the ways that Obama specified that states should go, because without the hope of $1.5 billion or whatever, there's no way that the California legislature would have made any move on data systems. Of course, once they made the move, they backed off it because they didn't get the money. But you see that across the nation, that states made some fairly strong efforts to win this money and led them to do things that they weren't inclined to do on their own. I think what Romney will do is perhaps try to have the same kinds of incentives and get leverage out of it. I doubt that it will be as prescriptive as Obama.
That's what he says.
The big difference in overall policy between Obama and Romney is that the Obama Department of Education and modus operandi is to try to be very detailed on what states should do. And I think that Romney will not try to specify in such detail what the states do, but try to put it more in terms of transparency on outcomes.
Mike, you mentioned that Race to the Top supports charter schools, so that's part of the education plank for Obama. But Romney seems to support charter schools as well. Is there either one of you, or is there any difference between the ways that they support charter schools policy-wise?
Not that I can think of a great deal. It was the first federal charter school law that enabled money to start charter schools and encourage them happened under President Clinton. It was expanded by President Bush. Then it was expanded again and deepened by President Obama, who specified in Race to the Top a lot of, we had 5 categories of things states had to do about charter schools. They couldn't have a cap, they couldn't turn down local applications unless there was good reasons, and so on. So they upped the ante, and it appears that Governor Romney will do the same thing. So this has been a bipartisan policy that, if Romney were elected, I would predict would continue through 2 Democratic presidents and 2 Republican presidents.
I mean, one answer to the overall question is when you compare the positions of Obama and Romney, it's really hard to get much light between them. That both of them have a pretty consistent set of positions that say you should have more choice through charter schools. Romney would differ from Obama in that he would support some of the voucher systems that are included private options, and that's the big difference there. So where Obama supported more charter schools, he tried to shut down the Washington, D.C. voucher program that would allow for private attendance in D.C. So there's that difference, but they both support better evaluations of teachers. They both support an accountability system that has at least lots of transparency. Obama would probably put more restrictions on what states had to do if schools were failing than Romney would. Romney would put more of the onus on the states to have plans of what to do when schools aren't performing well. But on a wide range of topics, they're surprisingly close. And surprisingly in the sense that Mike brought up previously, the Obama positions are not what you'd think of as pro-teachers union. So much so that before Obama won the nomination in 2008, he went to the NEA, National Education Association Convention, and was booed. And the NEA has subsequently retracted the booing, but they don't have any place to go. They're not happy with Obama in general. Neither of the teachers' unions are, but at the same time, they don't have any place to go. And so that has led to pretty consistent policies.
Well, they do oppose the voucher program. The Romney proposal is to take the $15 billion in Title I, which is a formula grant-driven thing for low-income children, and the $12 billion in ID for special education students, and give vouchers to attend any district, charter, or private school if the state law permits the private school. So it's really, the idea of a voucher which goes to the parent and not to the school. That's
No, it goes to the school that they go to.
Yeah.
It follows the kid.
It follows the kid. But
as opposed to being filtered first through a district.
Yeah, that's okay. That's correct. And so the real rub is that, and partly that, and then the other is the inclusion of private education in the voucher system. So that now President Reagan proposed it, didn't get it. Bush proposed it, didn't get it. It's really hard to see that getting through the Congress unless the Republicans really sweep. I almost think they would need to get 60 votes in the Senate to block a filibuster to get a voucher program, would be my guess.
So voucher is a word that gets everybody's attention. People have strong opinions about it. The whole voucher program, I don't support the Romney position in the sense that I think it's kind of trivial. We're talking about $25 billion out of a $600 billion total spending on education, K-12 education in the U.S. And if you gave everybody their $900 that they could take someplace, it doesn't make any difference. What the Romney position is on this is that this would support some of the states that have gone to vouchers and more choice by having money for handicapped children or for poor disadvantaged kids go with the kid to whatever school they went to. And it's sort of more symbolic, I think, than it is having any serious impact, unless you think that the symbolism of saying vouchers is something you want to fight over.
Yeah, the inclusion of private education, that just drives the Democrats, a little crazy. So whenever you start throwing that in there, that's where the line begins to draw. And we've seen in some states that the public aid, state aid, has gone to private religious schools. And that has been a barrier that had hardly been scaled until a Republican 210 sweep in the state governments in so many states. So we've reached a wall that had been where you now have significant programs to private schools in some states. So this is interesting and an important development.
Yeah, it's mostly, to be clear, there's Milwaukee, there's Washington, D.C. and
no, there's Indiana, there's Louisiana.
Indiana, they're just opening this up.
Louisiana, and there's some others.
So what is the record with regard to the success of voucher programs if one of the goals is school choice, if another goal is schools that aren't attracting students would close or change their ways, that overall student achievement would improve, teachers would flock to the good schools? What is the record? What have we been seeing?
Well, the place where it's been evaluated most clearly is Milwaukee. And in Milwaukee, you get a slight positive difference between public and private and voucher schools and the traditional public schools. In test scores, you find that the parents are much happier on average going to the voucher schools than not. There's some selection. Now, these are hard analytical problems, there's some selection going on. But they look pretty similar. So then you ask, well, so does that mean that we should shut down the voucher schools if they're not getting significantly better answers? And the obvious answer to an economist is that when I go to the airport, I pay exactly the same for an Avis and a Hertz rental car. Should we shut down Avis? And the answer is no. I mean, you shouldn't, because then we would still pay exactly the same price for a rental car to the one company, but it would be a higher price.
My view is there's so little solid research on this that if you would blow it up to a big scale, you just don't know what would happen. It's a classic thing of small cases and what would happen. So we've had voucher initiatives on the California ballot twice, maybe 3 times. And they have never gotten more than 1/3 of the vote. And my position has been, I just don't know what would happen. I mean, there's no data to predict what would happen when you do it.
My answer is the California Teachers Association had raised a lot of money to fight those vouchers, and that the vote doesn't tell you. And it wasn't uncertainty that led to.
No, that wasn't the reason, but I'm just saying it's a hard sell in this state. But the argument of when you take something to a huge scale from very small data, it's highly unpredictable.
I agree completely.
So we argued nobody knew what would happen.
So, but that's not what's involved in this presidential election.
No, that's not. You made that clear. Yeah.
Another issue that both men have spoken to is enhancing the attractiveness of the teaching force, enhancing the quality of the teaching force, perhaps by looking more at how to attract higher performing college grads, raising a floor on test scores, those kinds of things. What are the points of view of each administration or each candidate? Are there differences? And what might be promising policies in this area?
I don't think Obama has spelled out in detail any policies. You're going to go back to the fact that the federal government provides about 8 cents on the dollar of operating expenditures in the country, and to reform the teacher system would take quite a bit of money, I think, to do something. We've tried various categorical programs, small earmarked demonstration programs, exemplary programs. None of that has taken hold in a broad way. And the current money for teacher improvement goes in a formula down to the districts. It's a small amount of money, and as far as I can tell, it does not much of anything. So it sort of merges with their general fund almost. So I don't think there is a strategy, and I question whether the federal government can do much there. The states control the certification of teachers, and the locals control the payments and the contracts, and so they could do some things on evaluation, but that's different than, say, capacity building, and which was, I think, the thrust of your question. Yeah. So neither candidate that I know of has anything that impresses me that it would make much difference, and I don't know what it would be.
I think they're both for good teachers.
Yeah, they're going to talk about it.
It's pretty clear about this.
Yeah.
My own view is that teachers are today woefully underpaid. The good teachers. The bad teachers are woefully overpaid. And that the reason for pushing on evaluation is to try to change it so that you can pay more to the good teachers. I have argued, quite unsuccessfully, with my friends who run the 2 teachers' unions, that it's not in their interest to hold to the current salary schedule that says that you get paid the same regardless of anything about you, whether what you know, how well you do in the classroom, or anything else. Because I think that that's why teacher salaries are low, is that it's hard for either districts or the state legislature to say we're going to pay a lot more for teachers when the next sentence is, and we're going to pay a lot more for both good and bad teachers. And it just holds down overall salaries. If there was some opening so that not all money went equally to all teachers, I think you could both afford and politically make it feasible to have much higher salaries for teachers, which I think is the appropriate policy.
We have made, as a country, a significant breakthrough in the last 4 years in the discussion and even the implementation of teacher evaluation. The prior situation was that in California, between 96 and 98% were rated satisfactory, and it was largely a symbolic evaluation. And so this has been moved, this policy of thinking about evaluation and using student test scores for it has come much farther than most people, including me, would have predicted 4 years ago.
Well, but I think this is where what happened in Chicago a month ago is likely to be pretty damaging. Chicago had a teacher strike, 350,000 kids, a drop in the bucket by California standards, but 350,000 kids out on the street for 10 days. And a very aggressive president of the local teachers union in Chicago who just clobbered the mayor of Chicago and resisted any evaluation and use of any evaluation of teachers in the contract. I am afraid that that's going to have broad implications for the country because Karen Lewis, the president in Chicago, has hinted that she wants to run for president of the American Federation of Teachers against Randy Weingarten, who was on the verge of at least saying that we had to do something different. And I don't think she'll do it.
Yeah, I'm not as pessimistic with a lot of the states. You see states like Colorado and others that are pushing forward here, Tennessee. So the EFT is primarily in big cities, and see more resistance there. But I think there's still a lot of movement compared to what there was.
Yeah, no, I agree completely with the movement, but I think it's all a battle. And it's Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, got lots of the publicity for his aggressive, clearly anti-union stand. But there are a dozen other states that have dramatically changed the labor laws with respect to teachers and evaluation and other things. And I think it's partly because the unions have been so recalcitrant about agreeing to participate in the evaluation system that a number of states have just said, screw this. If you won't play with us, we'll change the rules.
So Mike, you wanted me to ask questions about higher education policy, but before we go there, I wanted to open it up to the audience if they have questions about K-12 policy or politics. Feel free to introduce yourself.
My name is Susan True, and my question is actually about early learning. So President Clinton and President Obama have both shown a commitment to expanding early learning opportunities with expansions of early Head Start and reauthorization of Head Start and other programs. Any sense of where Romney falls on early learning?
Well, from my standpoint, I would hope that he did away with Head Start, which I think has been a disastrous program that has been early learning for the disadvantaged population of the country. I would hope that he would replace it with something that was a better program that was more aimed at education as opposed to jobs in cities than Head Start is. I think that Romney will support expansion of early learning opportunities for disadvantaged on a means-tested basis, not on a across-the-board basis.
Yeah, and Romney's spokesman in a debate, Phil Handy, former head of the Florida State Board of Education, he sort of indicated that, he said something like Head Start's been around too long and that they were going to take a real run at it if they got a chance. So I would agree with Rick that that's, so what they would replace it with would be unknown. But
I mean, this is an example, in my opinion, of how the rhetoric gets in the way of policy. The Democratic administrations, Clinton administration specifically, and a bit Obama administration says, well, we just have to expand Head Start, by which he's saying, well, we're going to expand early childhood education, but he chose the wrong vehicle, and they've chosen the wrong vehicle for it because of the history and institutional structure of Head Start.
Another question? John?
My name is John Blunt. I'm a fifth-year doctoral student, and my question's about the politics race to the top. So I'm curious about why it has been as successful as it has in getting states to move, and whether it's, I mean, I can think of a few explanations. One is that there's a public case for this, so states are doing things that they otherwise didn't want to do, but they feel like they have to. Another explanation would be that the money was so tight before, and there's just any potential for money, it'll sort of jump. I'm curious about thoughts on that.
yeah, there's actually political science studies going on now to try and answer your question. I don't know. I was a participant in it at a pretty close level. For some reason, ideas just spread rapidly. It's like dropping a match in dry grass or something, and this just caught on, and we have to do this, we have to go to this, and I was on this panel to select them, and all the states that I reviewed, there were 5 of them, sent their governors. And we were up there telling them to be quiet because they were just spewing this general BS, and we had these general questions. We had these specific questions because I had these huge sheet with these points that I had to fill out. And so, I love telling the governor of a big state, could you be quiet because I have these important questions, And she was very, of course. So it was just, we can make conjectures, but I think it's an important thing to study. I think this is an important question in federal policy, is if you can get that kind of leverage, we've got to figure out why you got it, and then if you want federal leverage and you think that's a good idea, you can replicate it.
So my guess is that you don't get the same leverage again. This was $4.5 billion with the possibility of getting up to $500 million if you were a big state. And lots of people ex post said, this isn't a lot of money. Why are we doing all of this? And that originally they were enamored with the idea of a free $500 million, and then they found out that only Tennessee and North Carolina could get that money. And they sort of said, well, it's a bad, we should even play our own lotteries. It's a better deal.
Next question.
My name is Salil Gidani. My question is about, well, both of you seem to think that there's some rift between President Obama and the teachers' unions, but I've heard and read Romney attack Obama for being in bed with the teachers' unions or kowtowing to the teachers' unions or whatever. So, I mean, is he banking on the idea that most people associate the Democratic Party enough with teachers' unions still this kind of attack will work, or why do you think he's employing this strategy if it's not grounded in the truth as it stands right now?
Well, nationally, it is grounded in the truth. The Democratic Party has been the largest recipient of funds, and the teachers' unions are the largest contributor to campaigns. Obama has pulled away from the traditional unions and hadn't gone down the line. He's still supportive, I think, of them in general. But this is political rhetoric too, because I think that one of Obama's strengths has been that he has tried to move away from the teachers' union. The teachers' unions are to the Democratic Party as the social conservatives are to the Republican Party. That's right.
But Romney has some fact to his assertion, because both unions have enthusiastically endorsed Obama, and they're working hard, and seems to me he has every right to say they've endorsed you, they're giving you money, they're sending their field troops in, so he's...
Randy Weingarten, the head of the American Federation of Teachers, the smaller of the two unions, takes out a paid political ad in the New York Times every week, and recently went on and about how it was vital to the country that Obama be reelected.
Stu Levin, Consulting Associate Faculty, that's the official title, Department of Geophysics. I'm showing my age, but I'm sure when you and I were young, there was doctors, lawyers, teachers were the honorable professions that all our parents wanted us to go to. Doesn't seem teachers are any more the honorable profession. How do you get people into it and give them the honor these days?
So that's the classic statement about one of the problems with U.S. education is that what you might call too many opportunities for women, that they no longer are just nurses and teachers. I think you change it by making education a profession, where I would define a profession as one where people are responsible for their own performance. And you pay people for their performance, and you attract in a large number of other people. I would myself also eliminate most of the certification requirements for getting into teaching, because I think they act to inhibit large numbers of people from going into teaching, because you have these barriers, make it very costly to want to possibly go into teaching, because it costs you 1 out of 4 years of undergraduate school to prepare, and if you don't know whether you're going to do it or not, that's a pretty costly thing.
I would counter with, I think the teaching profession, overwhelmingly female, 80% and going up in recent years, has been at its root, like nursing and social worker and so on, drawn in part from what one would call the caring professions. These are not people that I believe enter overwhelmingly to get paid for performance like an insurance salesman or a stockbroker or something. So I think just appealing to people on the basis of performance pay and things of that sort would ignore the caring side of it, if you will, the more feminine side of it. And so it's a very complex mix. Undoubtedly, part of what Rick says, there ought to be some element of that. I think the balance of it, he has too much on the performance side. And so how to attract this particular population that's drawn to it is a real question. A related thing that has come up just in the last few years, like teacher evaluation, is an alternative view of the teaching profession. That it ought to be heavily young people who turn over rapidly. That you shouldn't say, well, the ideal teacher is Mrs. Jones that stayed there for 40 years, that this is more of a rapid fire kind of turnover. The younger people in the unions we just saw this survey, you undoubtedly saw as well, have very different opinions about teacher evaluation compared to the older teachers. So this idea of this more turnover workforce is interesting. The charter schools employ this very much. That's how they stay in business, because they have a business model of younger teachers that turn over, and so they're lower paid because they don't get way up the scale and so on. So there's also that model floating around, that's somewhat interesting. I don't think you can build a whole profession of. I guess you have over about 3.5 million teachers in America. So, whether you can build that kind of a mass on that, I doubt. But it's complex, and I think has to have several elements to it.
It's a general worldwide problem, by the way, that everybody except for maybe Finland, which is our outlying country.
Of what, 4 million people, or what is it?
Yeah, it's 4 million. Except for Finland, if you go around the world, they bemoan the fact that teachers get no respect, and that's just everywhere.
Yeah, I asked the Finns, they kept talking about the minority problem. And I said, well, who's your minority? He said, oh, those Swedes, and that's their problem. And I thought, well, it'd be an interesting problem to have with that.
Sure.
I had a comment. I'm a visiting researcher from the University of Helsinki and the University of Cambridge. And first of all, I wanted to say about the feminization of the teaching profession. One of the things they do in Finland, where it's very hard to get into school to become a teacher, is they actually have affirmative action for men. So it's easier to get in if you're a man. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is that actually if a profession becomes feminized, then actually the pay tends to go down. So that keeps the desirability up. And the second thing is the idea that it's good for young boys to also be taught, and good for girls too. So I would say that maybe the problem isn't that women have options, it's that we're not attracting men into the teaching profession. And regarding this idea of having young students in the class, or young teachers teaching, I think that it's really great to have old people who've had a career as an engineer come in and teach too. But I think the idea of having a flexible workforce that comes in and out of teaching would be so great, to get people who have had other professions to come in and teach for a couple of years and then go back into the workforce. I think that would be great for kids.
That's where these barriers are important. I cannot teach high school economics. And I just can't do it because I'm precluded.
Yes, in the back.
Hi, Karakon, student. If you were both candidates to the presidential election, what will be your action plan for education?
Lay out your whole platform.
Well, I
Pick a plank.
Yeah, pick up a land.
Pick a party.
You have to think about the constraints of the federal role. That's the first thing. I mean, this is not a national ministry, as you know, and so you begin with, as people said, the federal government is the junior partner, and so it's a question about, you want to accomplish a few things, and then you have to, because you can't move on all fronts at once, or many fronts at once. So I wouldn't spew off a big, holistic program, because I couldn't accomplish that with a federal role of 8 cents on the dollar and the money that you're looking at probably now. So I would focus on the areas heavily that Obama did in Race to the Top. Better curriculum, better data, better teacher policies, and I support charter schools as and our board, State Board of Education California supports them. So, yeah, I think those are 4 to stick with, and to try and figure out approaches to those. My own view is that the curriculum, the Common Core curriculum, will drive brand new assessments. Obama gave $360 million to 2 groups to develop all new assessments and get America away from multiple choice machine scored testing, and it would look more like the PISA exam, where you'd have to solve problems and then apply things, build models, evaluate, interpret. It would, and you would have a very longer questions you'd have to answer than bubble in. So we've gotten to a point, for better or worse, that a lot of our change in education in America is driven by assessment, tests, measurement. Jim Popham called it measurement-driven instruction. And so you got to make sure you have the right measurements then. If you're going to drive instruction and try and drive the system, you better be sure those are good. And so I think I would continue with Common Core and the assessments that back them up. It's a long-term thing. I don't think we'll see any real movement in implementation of 2018 with this. So it's not, it's a long-run policy, and I would hope that they would continue that. Now, Romney on Common Core curriculum has said he wouldn't have an aggressive federal role about it, but I don't think he'd move to repeal it. And what he would do on assessment, I don't know.
So my policy would take off from what Mike just said. I think that a good accountability system is essential, that you can't improve without such a thing. But the current No Child Left Behind is a little bit backwards. It's maybe 180 degrees out of phase. What the federal government can and should be doing is giving better guidance about what people should know and how they're measured, how you assess it. But the federal government can't run schools, and the current No Child Left Behind has lots of requirements of what schools have to do if they're not doing well. That should be state and local responsibility, and you ought to have a lot of local decision-making and autonomy and hold them responsible for results. And so that's the way I would move the whole system. I would get out of all the teacher training stuff federally. I would get out, because it hasn't worked. I would get out of lots of the restrictions of how schools are run and concentrate more on what they're doing, and continue, if not expand, the role of the federal government in supporting disadvantaged students of one sort or another, providing extra support for them, but not restricting how it's done.
Okay.
Unless you want to move on.
Feel free, and we'll if you have a higher education question, I'd like to move in that direction as well.
Odette Durant's first-year doctoral student in the education department. I'll put my question first. My question is, you talked a lot about similarities between both Romney and Obama. I'm curious whether you do see differences in terms of what funding would look like under their administration. So I know you said, Mike, it's only 8 cents on the dollar, which is still something. Could be 8.5 for the Senate or whatever. But it seems like the federal government also has so many other things that they do that trickle down and impact state budgets, where most of the money comes from. So just wondering if you think it would look different under those two presidents.
Well, I think the fear of the Democrats is that another round of tax cutting will not lead to explosive educational, economic growth, and therefore that will really be cutting taxes, and we'll have less money for education. So the Democrats are, I think, correctly pushing the point that it's very risky with Romney's view that he says he won't cut education. Before, he seemed to indicate we might have to cut it, but in the debate he said he wouldn't cut it. But, inflation goes along, and so maybe he wouldn't increase it, and God knows what would happen. So he has a more aggressive policy in terms of economic change and economic policy. So it's more unknown, and I think it has more downside risk to education funding. Rick?
I think that funding for education at the federal level is going to be pretty stable. It went along about 8%, jumped up to 9% under Bush, jumped up a lot under the stimulus money, but that was largely wasted, in my opinion. And then it's back down to between 8 and 9%, and I think it's not going to move very much.
I think
that,
I would agree with that prediction. But you don't know what would happen with these tax cuts, whatever his tax cut plan is. Then he's going to close loopholes, but he won't say which ones.
No, we have a big fiscal problem. We have a big federal fiscal problem and a big state fiscal problem, both. And it's hard to see how we get out of either of them, given the current politics. I'm actually more pessimistic about the state problems than the federal problems, but I think both of them are pretty severe.
So,
moving to higher education.
sure.
I attended the Faculty Senate meeting today, and they were talking about online learning and online education. Bill Bowen talked at the Tanner lectures about the same subject.
Good.
And it's kind of being sold as technology will allow you to get an 80, maybe a 90% solution for 25% the cost. Is that the right way to go, and will it actually work, in your opinion, for community colleges and higher education in general?
Well, we're at the beginning stages of this, and I think the appropriate answer is we don't know. And as somebody said to me, a lot of what's up there as online education is like the movies in 1920s or 30s, and I think that's pretty good. You have a talking head up there delivering a lecture, and that's sort of what they did with the movies in the 1920s and 30s. And so,
you go down to the Stanford Theater.
Yeah, you can go down to Stanford Theater. You want to see online ed today, yeah. And I really think that could be true, and it's pretty primitive, and it's beginning. And Stanford just had a meeting of the trustees, I believe in June, where the trustees made a decision to get all the way into this. So you've just got the beginning of a movement. Nobody's talking much about the support students will need with these courses and what that support looks like, and how much that would cost. But it's really exciting, and it is. It's very low level, so it has a potentially big upscale side from now. It's definitely something to watch. It is attractive in that the marginal costs are really pretty low, once you begin. So I think it's, people that are predicting that it's going to transform things and all that. We heard that in K-12. I heard it about radio. I'm that old. Then I heard it about television. And then I heard it about computers, desktop computers. And then I heard it about if we ever get to small handheld devices, then we won't have to fill the room with these computers. Well, we have the handhelds, but you check them at the door at the K-12 school. So, K-12 has been marvelously resistant to this in terms of its, they've walled it off into computer labs, which in my day were typing labs, and you went over there. And so I think higher ed, it'll break through more. The good thing, what's exciting about higher ed is you're dealing with adults, you don't have all these constraints, and so the upside there will be faster, and it's more interesting and more dynamic.
Yeah. I agree completely with the idea that we're just sort of playing with this and trying to experiment with how it's done. But it's hard to understand why you put up with my lectures when you can get the best lecture in the nation and have me along the side kibitzing. You have lots of possibilities to dramatically change the character of education. My union doesn't like it any better than the unions for K-12 because there are implications for hiring and the demand for my union colleagues that are pretty large. And so there are lots, why it's slow as it is, given that in the middle of Silicon Valley, you see what they're doing on almost every front except for education. It's so slow because there are barriers put up all around the place to prevent much from happening, so people don't want to invest in these areas that have lots of barriers. Mike might correct me, but if I want to take an online course at Palo Alto High School, I have to get a course that's provided by one of the adjacent counties. That the Orange County electrons are somehow different than the electrons in surrounding counties.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a course, but if you want to run a charter school,
you sort of think about this for just a very minute amount of time, and you realize that this has no logic in anything except for protectionism.
Yeah, it's not quite that bad. If you go to Kern County, you can offer it in any county that is contiguous.
Yeah,
Kern County has 5 counties, so they're all down in Kern County where they have 5 counties around them, and you can get into LA through Kern.
Yeah.
Because
So, I mean, but I think that this has the potential, more potential than the film strips and TV and other things that we've seen before, because you have an industry that is pretty innovative in lots of these things.
Well, let me move it back to federal policy for a moment. So federal involvement in higher education, you know, so a lot of the big dollars, as we all know, here in a research institution is in federal grants, lots of money, but perhaps the most significant play by the Fed is in financial aid. And here I think you might see differences between the parties and between the candidates. So for example, support of Pell Grants, Obama wants to continue to support those, and those are need-based grants for undergraduates. And then also the loan system itself. Romney proposes to privatize the loan system, or much more. Reprivatize. And Obama is staying away from that. What are the implications of these differences, if I've got them correctly, for financial aid, and the implications of that for student access, and you can even go a step beyond that, for tuition rates at institutions, because those are obviously connected.
Well, I'll take this first because Mike knows about the subject, and I don't. So the Stanford loan program from the federal government used to be operated entirely by private banks, but with a full federal guarantee. So the banks had no risk. They traditionally received about a 3% interest premium for taking no risk. And it's absolutely stupid. I mean, there's no reason why you had to guarantee them 3% premium for no risk. The answer of the Obama administration was to take over much of the loan program from the federal government. The federal government would make the loans. I think that's borders on absolutely stupid also. Because there's no indication that the federal government is particularly good at providing loans and providing these services, and that the government can do that. To me, that both policies are bad, in that you can cut the premium that you give for loans, and that's straightforward. So I do that. Pell Grants are a little bit more complicated, because Pell Grants are guaranteed to the student in terms of access to them by parameters of a formula, but the amount is subject to how much is appropriated. And I think that both presidents will have to face, tough decisions on how much to appropriate. I think that the Pell Grant has been a pretty successful program for low-income students to get grant programs, and in some form that will proceed. Both candidates, I believe, want to argue against tuition increases of universities, which I don't think is federal policy at all. The federal government shouldn't be in that policy. The main objection is that tuitions at public universities have risen faster than inflation, and therefore both candidates want to say we're going to protect students. I think that's entirely wrong. What tuition at public universities, take California, the tuition is basically a statement of the split in the cost of education between the current students and the taxpayers. And I think California operates a bad policy, because they say that the people who go to school don't pay much of the total cost of education, and the general taxpayers do, which to me means that the general taxpayers are subsidizing the winners of the system, because the winners of the system are the ones who get into UC Berkeley and are going to succeed. And I don't think that low-income taxpayers, which there aren't too many in California actually, but that the general taxpayer should be subsidizing the people who have won by getting into the public universities. But that aside, I don't think that's the business of the federal government.
Rick, is there any relationship, do you think, between federal policy for financial aid and states that set these tuitions? You know, if there's more financial aid available, perhaps states would react by raising tuition because they can pull in more dollars?
There's a little bit of evidence that they do that. There's a little bit of evidence that the more you raise the outside money, that the states react to that. It's not one for one, but they do increase their tuition so that they cut back their share at the expense of the federal taxpayer.
I think on the student loan issue, the risks of going back to the banks are high, that they will extract some premium, and that the federal government in direct loans from the federal government has performed to me better and good enough to continue with the federal assumption of the student loan program. So I really am nervous about going back to the banks that would be proposed by Romney. The Obama administration has cracked down on various dubious practices of for-profit schools. Last year in California, for-profit schools awarded 12% of the degrees and certificates. They're growing rapidly as the public sector declines. There are certain recruitment practices and educational practices they're doing, and I think they need some regulation. Romney has been saying he doesn't want to do much, and he wants to repeal some of the regulations the Obama administration has put in on for-profit schools that I approve of. On Pell Grants, it's hard to know. They make a lot of talk about that. I've been taking a different tack on Pell Grants, which is that we need to send some signals to students that they need to work on preparation as one of the conditions of getting these grants. And I would really want to put more into that and look at that harder. The Republican Congress put in what were called super Pell Grants, where you got more money for better preparation. It didn't work as an experiment, but I'd like to revisit those ideas. Community colleges, Romney hasn't talked much at all about those. This has been a major priority of the Obama administration, the improvement of community colleges. 45% of our undergraduates enrolled in community colleges. 62% of our undergraduates in California enrolled in community colleges. So this is a passion the Obama administration has had, which I don't see duplicated in the Republican candidate. Immigrant students, which is a hot issue. I think there's no doubt that the Obama administration has been more sympathetic to their needs than the Republican Congress. And so that would be another reason I would be fearful of the Obama administration. And lastly, civil rights.
Not the Romney administration.
The Romney administration. Yeah. And lastly, the civil rights enforcement. The Obama administration has been more aggressive on that than the Republican predecessors under the Bush administration. So I think the higher education case is actually the one the Democrats ought to be making. But everybody wants to talk about K-12, where it's sort of hard to make these differences with it boiling down in the end of this symbolic voucher program is the thing we could rail about.
Well,
yeah, but you've outlined that. I don't disagree.
Let me respond quickly to a couple of things you said. I think that, as best I can tell, I'm not working for Romney, so I'm just trying to infer what's being said. I know a number of people that are working for him. I think that he is very supportive of community colleges and thinks that's an important thing. And I don't think he's going to do anything about it that would jeopardize community colleges. I think on the for-profits is a big difference. And Romney has said that he wants to make it transparent, more transparency in terms of the performance and outcomes, but not be into regulating them as much as Obama would, which the biggest difference between the two administrations seems to be the sort of complete anti-private involvement or for-profit involvement, where I think tax status isn't the big deal. It's Stanford's a for-profit university, it just doesn't pay taxes. And I don't see that making the distinction on tax status is what you should do, but I think you should make it very clear what the performance of the schools are.
So, yeah, we've run out of time, but because there are probably a bunch of California voters in here, I wonder if we can just get a quick rundown, perhaps, of your views on propositions 30, 32, 38. It's confusing for a lot of folks about whether they do similar things, different things. Can you help us out?
Well, I'll speak to 30 and 38. They're similar, and the argument, and they have contrasting arguments. The argument for 30 is it would get
You
more.
have to explain what they are.
Okay, sorry. Yes, both initiatives would raise taxes on largely on income taxes, overwhelmingly on income taxes. There's a 1/4% sales tax increase in the Proposition 30 that the governor supports, and a 38 supported by Molly Munger, attorney, has all income tax, and it would distribute money to schools of $6 billion in the case of 6.5, $7 billion. Hard to know what these estimates will yield in the case of 30, and $10 billion in the case of Proposition 38, which has their tax go on for more years than 30. Both are temporary measures. 7 years for Proposition 30. Yeah. and 10 for 38, at least they expire at that point. So both are initiatives to support education funding. 38 would provide money for early childhood education and not for colleges. 30 has colleges in there and universities and not early childhood. Proposition 30 gets the money to schools quicker when we need it more, when we need it urgently. And then when you get all down to it, you know, these dollars raised from these propositions are not radioactive. You can offset some ways, you know, by cutting other education funds. So it's hard to say that the money, you know, will not be somewhat commingled in the treasury of the state in some fashion. But clearly, I think 30 will keep its promises of giving the money to education, and so will 38. So these are essentially, do you want to raise income taxes? In the case of 30, they're trying to do it with people who earn over $250,000 or couples that earn over $500,000. And so it's just hits those people. 38 is a progressive income tax. It kicks in at, I think, $50,000 and taxes more of the range of incomes. So it's you know, a choice as to whether we need more revenue for government at this point or whether you're satisfied with it. And that's sort of where they are, where you want to be. I mean, 30 promises more of a free ride if you're, you know, not making $500,000 as a couple. 1/4% sales tax increase. So it's you know, that's about it, being an overview of it. You want to speak on 32 or
is it more? Is it too, does it oversimplify it to say it's the difference in the tax base, the citizenry?
I think that's a main thing. Yeah, I think the 38 is a complex initiative. It, you know, tries to distribute money directly to schools, has its own formula, has some money for technology. It's one of these initiatives that is too complex in my case. You know, you're engineering it too much, and then you can't amend it, you know, because it's an initiative and the people have spoken and they don't know what the hell they voted for. Other than they either want to pay more taxes or they don't, and they don't want to help the schools or they don't. And so I think that it's partly taxes, yeah, They're fairly similar, actually, but they've gotten into attacking each other, so that's a problem.
So, one of the issues is the big overview of what you think about the state fiscal problem, because both of them are essentially ideas that if we raise revenues, which we'll call temporary, we can solve the fiscal problem we've gotten into in the past in the state. Both of them push marginal tax rates up, particularly for higher income people. So I know 38 is more aggressive on this than 30. 38 is the one by Molly Munger, and 30 is the one by Jerry Brown. In 38, you add 2.5% tax rate to the top income people in the state, and that is going to pay for redistribution for the schools. The question that you have to ask is whether, in fact, that change in the tax structure and it's probably not sufficient, by the way, to solve the fiscal problems. It's probably not, something else has to be done. But whether you think that continuing pressure in that way is good for the state. I personally think that we are in a state sitting in Silicon Valley where you have some of the higher earners in the state, and there's very little that actually holds people in Silicon Valley. Much of the estimate here is based on the fact that people won't respond to increased tax rates. And in fact, the people who are earning this money, the higher income people, are probably the most mobile of any population. You can just go over to Nevada, where there's no income tax, state income tax.
But then you have to live in Nevada.
You have to live in Nevada. No, you can live in Washington, Nevada, or Texas. Why do I know this?
Tennessee, I think.
Why do I know this? I've looked at it. I know it. There are some of us who are pretty mobile. So that's one issue. The second issue has to do with the school part of it. People say that California is 47th in the nation in terms of student performance because Proposition 13 has held down the funding on schools. 3 years ago, there was a $2 million study of schools in California by the Stanford School of Education and friends that tried to look at whether more funding in various ways would in fact help the schools. It was funded by a person at the Hewlett Foundation who particularly thought that the level of funding was the big problem in the state of California. $2 million later, the conclusion was that if you just put money into the current system, you would get no results, or you should expect to get no results. Which is different than saying if you changed the way the schools operate and put more money in, whether you'd get more results or not. But both of these measures say keep the current structure and put more money into it, $6 to $10 billion more into the schools. There is every reason to believe that it would, in fact, do what some people want, which would lead to higher teacher salaries in California, but nothing else. So it's not obvious to me that these are winners for the state of California.
So we've gone over time. If you have questions about Proposition 32, perhaps you can ask the panelists when we're done. But for now, let's thank the panelists for